What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over another episode of the fighting game tutorial series. In this episode we're going to be going over updating our credits a little bit more. We're going to specifically be going over how we can update the credits to have these things I've called events, which is to fire certain little animations at different times. And this will allow you to actually apply images or even videos to your credit screen. I also have updated the credit screen to have its own music, and that music is going to go away, of course, with the rest of the regular flow. So once you exit the credits, it will go back to the main menu, and the main menu music will play. This video is just going to make the credits look a lot nicer and give you a lot more freedom. We did almost everything we needed to do with text in the previous episode, but images, videos, that sort of thing, they can also be added, and they'll make your credits a little bit more enjoyable to watch. So before we get started, speaking of the credits, I can use this as the Patreon supporters and YouTube membership list. I want to give a huge shout out to you guys. Thank you for everything you've done, all the support you've given myself and the series and the channel. Really appreciate it. Really glad that you guys are enjoying. If you would like to get caught up in this series, we're on episode 158. We're really far along in the fighting game tutorial series. We still have a really long way to go, but we're making great progress. So you can go ahead and check out everything we've done in this series by clicking this icon in the top right corner right here. Alternatively, if you don't care about the series as a whole, but you do care about the credits, I'll link you to the first episode of the credits right here. You'll be able to build off of what we did in the first episode to make your credits the way you want to make them, customize them to your liking. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started on today's episode of the credits. To do so, let's go to our blueprints, widgets, menus, credits. And here is our widget. It looks very much the same as it did last time, but there are technically two other things that I've added in here. And I've added essentially image slots. So I've added just 2 images that I've bound, just because that's what I've got right now. However, I could add as many images as I want, and I could have them play while the credits are playing. So sometimes you'll be playing the credits of a game. You may see the developers of the team. You may see a video of something that went into the making of the game. You may see pets of the creators. There's a lot of things you may see during different credit sequences, and you want to be able to customize it to your liking. So you can put whatever you want here. For me, I have just 2 images, but really what these are image slots where you could get these images to show up. So it doesn't matter if you have an actual image that you've placed in here like me. You could always go in the graph and edit the actual individual images, or you could stack a bunch of images on top of each other. That would also work. Since the credits aren't going to be very CPU or GPU intensive, it doesn't matter if you make everything as convenient as possible. You can hard code a little bit more in these sections because these are more unique, right? This isn't gameplay driven. This is driven based on your experience that you want to give to the users who are looking at the credits. So it's so open-ended what you can do here. So I recommend having these image slots, right? I've called them credits image 1, credits image 2. They're quite literally just images that I brought onto the canvas panel. Now at this point, I'll show you everything I have for my images, but really it's not anything too complicated. The main thing is that I have an image of the size that I want, and I put it behind the credit scroll box. So my credit scroll box is a Z order of 0. As it says here in the comment, higher values are rendered last, and so they will appear on top. That is why we put our background image at a -10, because it's the lowest value here in the list of components. And so it will appear in the background. Our credit scroll box is 0, so we want to make sure that our images show up behind the credits text. So I put them both at -9 just because it's 1 greater than the background. But you can put it anywhere as long as it's less than the scroll box, you'll be good to go. And here are the actual values I have. You can go ahead and check them out if you'd like. So here are my positions and sizes. I did anchor it to the right side, and for the left image, I anchored it to the left side. Alignment 0.5, just so that the center was actually in the center of the image. For the appearance, I've actually put in my image now, but as I said, that is up to you. If you have an image you want to use now, I just use some of my character profiles. Not required that you do that. For your behavior, you're going to want your render opacity to start out at 0, unless you want this to be on the screen as soon as the credits show up. What I've done is I have that little fade effect, so these are both invisible to start. They fade in, they stay for a few seconds, they fade out, they stay faded out for a few seconds, and then the other one will fade in. Now, for my transform, I have changed the scale to be -1, because if I set this render opacity to 1.0 and I reset my scale, my mannequin was going to be facing to the right, and I wanted them to face inward toward the screen. So I just updated my scale like that and set the opacity back to 0. It's a very specific case for me. You may not have to do that. And while we're here, I'll go ahead and show you this one as well. Although it's very simple. I'll scroll through it pretty quick because it's essentially all the exact same. Only difference is I was using a different image and I don't have to change the scale. But this is what the image is. It's the mutant profile picture that I use everywhere. Now that's super simple, and with that out of the way, you actually don't have to worry about anything else on the design view right now. There is one other thing I'm going to show you as we get farther into the episode, but we can go into the graph. For the credits widget, for the graph we had basically everything in here. In fact, everything I'm highlighting we already had in event construct. So you won't have to add any of this if you already have done the previous episode. Same with everything in event tick, except for this crazy ugly line here. You know how I like to leave ugly lines sometimes so that we clean it up during the episode. So this is what we're going to be adding. That's why this line is going through these other nodes and it's super ugly. Don't worry, we're going to clean it up. And I've also added an additional few nodes to the event construct to get the game instance reference. And this is going to be for the music so that we can actually get our correct music type and play the music when we should and stop the music when we should. Let's start off with that because this is the only code change that we're going to need to make today. So if you go to your base game instance.h in the code, we have this eMusic type enum, and that determines what type of music we're going to be playing, or what song we're going to play. For me, I'm using the asset packs that were free on the Epic Marketplace, so I have a random song that I've added that I thought sounded pretty nice. Doesn't matter what song it is, just make a new enum value for it. And so in today's episode, I added one that I called E_credits, and then just gave it a display name of credits, but you could actually put the title in here if you know it. Once you do that, you can build, run the editor again, and go back into your credits widget. We want to make sure that we can access this variable from within the credits widget because we do need to be able to grab it to set the enum. So we're going to get a game instance reference. To do this, I've just moved everything over that was an event construct and added these 3 nodes to the start. You guys have probably seen this a lot throughout the series, but if you're just here for the credits, this is typically how I get the game instance reference in my game. So we have the get game instance node, and we can cast that to the specific game instance class we have in our project. Assuming this succeeds, you can drag off of the cast and promote it to a variable. You'll get a node here, and then you just have to rename it to game instance reference. So, like such. Now I've already got one. So I'm going to get rid of this one. Don't need that variable. Important to note in this case, the credits I do believe should be able to roll even if the game instance reference is invalid. Now the game instance reference should never be invalid as long as we're doing everything correctly. However, we don't want to stop the credits just because the music can't play, in my actual opinion. So if the game instance reference fails, it's okay. I still continue to do everything that we have in the credits. I just ignore setting this variable. Now, at the end of the event construct logic we had, I've added a few more nodes. see if this game instance reference is valid, and if it is, we're going to stop the music that is already running, which would be our main menu music, or potentially the music from the end of the story mode or arcade mode if we have credits play automatically after that. We're going to set our music type to be the credits music, and then we're actually going to call the play music function passing in this value. So to do this, it's very simple. We just drag our game instance reference into the scene, right click on it, and convert it to a validated get. And then, assuming this is valid, we have this stop music, which is part of my base function library. Remember that base function libraries, they don't have to be included or anything like that. It's just literally, they're functions that we can call from anywhere. So we have our base function library, and I have this stop music function. I don't have to change anything with it today, but just to show you what it does, is it gets the currently playing music, stops it, and resets the music type to default as there are none playing currently. So again, this is going to stop the main menu music. Now we're going to drag off of our game instance reference and set the music type, which is a variable we have that holds the enum that we updated earlier in the episode. And I'm going to set it to be credits. Then I'm going to call the play music function, which is also part of the base function library. To get these functions, should have mentioned, you can literally just type them in, like any other node. You don't have to drag off of anything. Stop music, play music. For play music, we have to know what type of music we're playing, so I pass it the music type that we just set. Now, once you do that, you'll be good to go with event construct. However, we actually won't be able to play any of that music unless we update our base function library function, because this switch statement on eMusic type will now have an additional field here, credits, the one we added earlier, that's not filled out. My logic for all of the music is essentially the exact same. Might as well space them out the same as well. And so I would recommend just copying one of these, pasting it, and overriding the credits, because it's easier. But I'll go through it really quickly. So we have our music type that comes in, assuming our game instance is valid, which it stores the music volume, by the way. So we grab the music volume off of that, and assuming it is valid, we can then create the sound and set the music type. So, like with the other songs, I drag off my credits value for my switch on eMusic type, and I call the create sound 2D function. It'll look like that. Now, I pass in my world context object. That's what you have to do for base function library or for these blueprint libraries, so that we know what the world is that we're calling it on. So I already have the world context up here, and it's kind of ugly, all these nodes, but I do have some reroute nodes, and essentially this node that's going into all the other world context objects is just going to be brought into this one as well. For the sound, I picked my song. I've chosen the Land of Mystery. I use my volume from my game instance as the volume multiplier. I don't change the pitch multiplier, the start time, the concurrency settings, the persist across level transition, or the auto destroy. All of that is good. Now, we need to keep track of the music that is playing, and I do that through a music reference. So I just drag off the create sound 2D that we have, and I use the target. This is the game instance. Okay, I know there's a lot of nodes going around here, but you can see here's my base game instance, and it goes into this reroute node, which goes up here, and it is this one that you see plugging into everything. So if you drag off the base game instance reference, you can do set music ref like that. And we're just going to pass the return value from create sound 2D. Then you can drag off the music ref and type play. And you want the one that's just play right here. Target is audio component, and I just start at the initial start time of 0. Now we can play the credits music, just like every other song and piece of music that we have in our game. So now with the event construct using the credits type here, you should actually be able to see or hear your music playing when you load the credit screen. Now the event tick is going to remain exactly the same as it always has. The only update is this guy, this ugly node right here. So to clean this up a little bit, what I'm actually going to do is, in the previous episode, I mentioned scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, or I might have said scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. Doesn't matter. We have 3 different set scroll offsets, depending on if we're at the minimum value, the maximum value, or somewhere in the middle. I'm going to be doing all this logic if we're somewhere in the middle, not at the minimum or maximum. Although that is up to you. You could do it at all 3. But to clean this up a little bit so it's not as confusing, I'm actually going to take the set scroll offset from here for the minimum and move it up. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Something like that. Doesn't have to be beautiful, just so that these 2 nodes aren't next to each other, because I'm dragging off of the set scroll offset where both branches before it are true. That means we are somewhere in the middle of the credits. And at this point, I can either manually put this in, like what we're doing right here, or I could have another event that we call. This should be good for now. It's a lot cleaner. You don't have to worry about what we're plugging this into now. I'll go over that in a second when we get there. But just know that I wanted to clean that up for you so you could see where this line was coming from. Now, let's go ahead and make an event before we do anything else. And we're going to call it animation finished. So I'm going to add custom event like this. Click it. You'll get a node. And I'm going to call this one animation finished. That's what I've got here. Now let's leave that for a second. Let's just have this custom event in the graph for now. And let's go to the designer view. So in the designer view, I've made some animations for the credits images. If you don't know how to make animations, that is okay. I'm going to show you. So you will probably have a timeline when you load this up. I always do, but I don't always have this animations tab. You can go to window up at the top and choose timeline and animations. If you don't have either of them, no worries, they're both here. They'll be checked if they are available, but you can uncheck them and check them again if you don't see them for any reason. Once you have the timeline and the animations tabs open, you can now make animations. And so I'm going to do a simple fade in, fade out for each of these. The way you make an animation is simple. You press plus animation and you name it. So press plus animation, and then I would call it like image 1 fade in, image 2 fade in, image 1 fade out, or image 2 fade out. Once you do this, actually I will go through this process with you. So click on your new animation in the tab, hit add track, and then you can choose a named widget. And for me, for my image 1 fade in and image 1 fade out, I'm going to pick the credits image 1. For image 2 fade in and image 2 fade out, I'm going to pick credits image 2. Once you pick this, you'll be able to add another track here, and this is the actual element that we want to change on it, and we're going to want to change the render opacity. Now I'm going to delete this new animation, and we're going to work off the old one, but that's how you get that working, the way you saw it. And so now you see what I have here. We have this actual graph, and we've made a little animation for it. So what you're going to want to do is use the timeline to add these key frames or these key notes on the timeline. And once we do that, we can actually determine what happens, and the animation will interpolate, so it'll go from one to the other on its own. So starting off, your render opacity should be 0 for both of image 1 and image 2. We did that earlier. And you'll have one key right here. It's this red circle at 0 seconds. You can drag these little tabs to move your animation around. And these values up here are seconds. So this is 0.25 seconds, 0.5 seconds, 0.75 seconds, 1 second. In my case, what I did is I went all the way to 2 seconds, clicked this button right here, this circle with the plus. I know it's small, but it's add a new key at the current time. Click that, and then change render opacity from 0 to 1.0 like I've done here. You can just click on it and change it. Now you should see your image appear. if you drag back and forth, you should see it should automatically go from 0 to 1.0 in a period of 2 seconds. At this point, I've done something additional just to leave the image lingering here for a little bit so it doesn't fade in and then immediately fade out. I've added 2 additional seconds and added another key here. I haven't actually changed anything. This is just to extend the duration of how long this image stays on the screen. There's other ways to do that too. I could just slow down the playback of the animation. I could add a delay. There's a lot of options here. So this part's not required. This is the important part, the 0 to 2. If you do want to do exactly what I did, I just used my little skimmer here, brought it all the way to 4 seconds, added a new key, and just left it at 1.0. So there's no change that happens between 2 and 4. Now that's actually pretty simple, right? So we're going to want to do that for image 1 fade in and image 2 fade in as well. Image 2 fade in is of course using Credits image 2, but it is the same process otherwise. So you can see I have my render opacity at 0. At 2 seconds into the timeline, I've added a new key, and it has a render opacity of 1. And then just for the length, I've added an additional 2 seconds with a render opacity of 1. Now, you can make 2 other ones for your fade out. Technically, you could just reverse your first 2 animations you made, and that would be a fade out, but I'm not doing that. You definitely can make it work by just reversing the animation, so don't worry. It's not a problem if you want to do it that way. But I think it's actually easier to understand if we just make separate animations for the fade outs. Once you've made these animations, you're going to do it exactly the same as the fade ins, except the render opacity is going to start at 1 when we're at 0 seconds. At 2 seconds, I'm adding a key and putting the render opacity to 0. So it's going from 1 to 0. Then I did what I did on the other ones. So I left another 2 seconds here and had the render opacity stay at 0. So it kind of just stays invisible for an extended period of time as well. Image 2 fade out is the same. Start at 1. 2 seconds in, add a key, go to 0. 2 seconds later, remain at 0. At this point, you have 4 animations you can use for these fade-ins, but you could do whatever you want. If you're really good with these animations, feel free to do a lot more sophisticated stuff as well. It is entirely up to you and how you want the feeling of your game to be. At this point, once we have our animations, we're good to go into the graph again. We have our animation finished event. We are also going to need some new variables, so I'm going to add a canTrigger event boolean and an event number integer. So I'm calling these things that show up events because I think that's what describes them best. Because you could have images, you could have videos, you could have concept art, whatever it is that you want here. You could have these things pop up. And I'm calling the fade in an event and a fade out an event. So in this case, I have 4 possible events. Essentially, they're just anytime we're going to play an animation. So what we want to do is kind of automate this so we don't have to make it so hard-coded. It's okay if you do hard-code it because maybe yours is super unique and you have to. Again, it's okay in this case because the credits are usually more open-ended. There's not like a strict way to do them. I've seen people even pre-render the credits and just play that video on the widget. What I'm going to do is make it so I could add other events or other animations, other images in the future. And so essentially, I'm going to play an animation, wait for the animation to finish. When the animation finishes, I'm going to call this event, which is going to increase the event we're on, then allow us to play another event. And when we play the other event, it'll begin the process again. Now that we understand a little bit more about that, let's go into our Boolean here that we just made. So you add variable, select a Boolean, and I called it canTrigger event. I've defaulted this to true. You have to compile after you've made your variable, and you should see this default value, and it should be false by default. It will be unchecked. I've checked it by default. This is because we are calling this logic from event tick. And so we want to make sure that we are only doing this logic when it is valid to do so. So this tick is really only ever happening the first time here. Otherwise, it's just going to call animation finished. And the only reason you ever have to call this from tick is if you want to base your events and your animations off of different scroll offsets or off of an actual period of time. If you don't want that and you just want to start your images at the beginning, like I do, you actually don't need to connect this from tick. You could connect it from the end of construct instead. So if I move my event logic, I could do something like this. Let's see where we're at. Like that. And we could go from the end of construct with the play music into this. And to follow our own rules, if we are going to do that, we should allow us to do this even if the game instance ref is not valid. So I'd recommend if you are going to do it just like this. And now at the end of construct, we will skip some nodes. Again, I'll get into this in a few minutes. And we can go to the logic we're currently at. And I can show you. We can open up the credits. It will still look the same. The only reason it was in tick, like I said, is if you want to have actual times, like 5 seconds between events. Or if you want to do something like, once we were this far down the credits, spawn this event. Which is very possible you might want to do something like that. It depends on your credits. That's why I'm trying to keep it as open-ended as possible. For me, event construct works. But don't rule out using tick if you have to. It's okay, it's just the credits. Alright, now let's talk about this. We already defaulted the boolean to be true because the first time we come into this function, upon event construct, right? We do event construct, we come in here, we want to trigger the first event. So we want it to be true by default. That's why we defaulted this. The event number, we're going to go from 0 to however many events we have, so we're going to leave the default value of the event number at 0. Now, in this event, we are going to want to increment the event number every time a successful event goes through. We also want to make sure we can trigger the event before actually playing it so they're not playing over top of each other. Now, this will not be an issue if we're just doing it from construct and then from this event like we're doing here. So this can trigger event isn't really necessary in this case. However, if you're doing it time-based or scrollbox distance-based, scrollbox offset-based, I should say, because that's what they call it, the set scroll offset, then you will need to have this boolean in here to make sure that you can trigger the event. I'm going to leave it in regardless in case we do more with it in the future, but you could actually ignore the can trigger event for now if you'd like. Once we do all this logic, we go into the branch. Assuming this is true, or assuming you're just ignoring it, like I just mentioned, we're going to go into a switch statement to determine what event number it is. So we literally can use our event number, determine what event we're on, and then call the proper animation. That's how this is going to work. So now let's go through setting it up. Here is our animation finished. So we just need to increment our event number every time this event is called. You can do a simple integer plus integer and leave it as 1, and then pass this into a set event number, just like this. Or you could use an increment node, like that. I usually do just +1 when it's convenient for me because I don't have to bring it through the code logic. I can just do the math and bring the execution line into the set, but that's up to you. Then I'm forcing can trigger event to be true at this point because this animation finished is the only time it's called. And if the animation is finished, we know we can trigger the next one. That one is completely done, so we can begin the next one. Now, can trigger event is true. If it is true, then we can continue through this branch. So, like I keep saying, if you do this through construct and through this event, this is never going to be false because it defaults to true and it's set to true immediately before this. So this will always succeed. But it could be false if you're trying to do it based off a time and one of the animations hasn't finished yet and it has to wait for that other one to catch up. This is as simple as just bringing the can trigger event in, getting it, dragging out to a branch, and then only dragging off the true. This branch that we just put in is the node that event construct leads into. Now, we use our event number, whatever it may be. Again, we're not really forcing it to be a value. We're just incrementing it every time we call this event. We can do a switch statement on it. And then you can add as many pins as you have events. So I have 4 events. Each image fade in and each image fade out, which is 2 plus 2, which is 4. There's also the default, which in my case is just going to reset this value so that it keeps playing as the credits are going. But you probably won't need to use that because you'll most likely have more images or more events and you'll tailor it to your specific number. Once you have the switch statement here, the rest of this is actually pretty simple. The first thing we have to do is an event called, or a function called bind to animation finished. So if we take an animation, in your variables section, you have this animations filter that is most likely closed. You can open that up, and here are all the animations that you made in the design view. You can bring them in any order. I do it as image 1 fade in, image 1 fade out, image 2 fade in, image 2 fade out. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring in image 1 fade in and get it. At this point, I can drag off of it and type bind to animation finished. And when this animation is done playing, it will then call the event that's passed into this delegate. So you can see image 1 fade in goes into the animation for this event. The delegate is rerouted to this node on the custom event we made. If you make a new custom event, so add custom event, this will be empty. But you can plug nodes into it, and they will get called through this delegate. So that's what's going on here, is this is saying call this event, whatever we're hooked up to. And we are going to do that for every single case here. Image 1 fade in, image 2, or image 1 fade out, actually, image 2 fade in, and then image 2 fade out. All the delegates link back to this one reroute node, which goes into this event. So this event continuously is called whenever any of these animations finish. At this point, I've just made a small function to actually play the animation and reset our variables that need to be reset, and I've called that at the end of all of these. So make a new function, and I called mine play event animation. Once you make it, it should automatically open up. It'll look something like this. You can then click on the function or click on the purple node that starts the function. And we're going to add an input parameter. We're going to pass in the widget animation so we don't have to have this big play animation node for every different animation. So you can add a new parameter. You can go to the type and type in widget animation and get an object reference. The widget animation is all of these animations we made within the widget. And then I just called it event animation. So if we go back to the event graph, we can now call this new function that we made. So play event animation, and we can pass in the animation that we're using, that we're binding to the animation finished. So image 1 fade in to the first one, image 1 fade out to the next one, image 2 fade into the third one, image 2 fade out to the fourth one. Let's go back into the play event animation one more time. And now we can finalize this function as well. So at this point, we just want to call the play animation node. For the target, it can remain as self because it's playing on this widget, but the animation is the event animation that comes into the function. Your start time, number of loops to play, playback speed, restore state are all fine. I did go ahead and decrease my playback speed just because I wanted it to be even longer than what I had, but that is entirely up to you. The play mode could be forward, reverse, or ping pong. Forward, since we did the fade in, fade out, forward is probably our best option. But if you're crafty, you could just use a forward and reverse on the same animation. That is also up to you. Can trigger event, I set back to false. Again, it won't really matter for us in this case, but if you do want to do something else based on time or scroll offset, this is the place you reset it. once this animation is playing, we don't want to be able to trigger event until we know that the animation has then ended. Now, going back to the event graph, we should be all set up now. Everything's good to go. We have this default case we have to care about in the switch statement. So again, you might leave this empty. If you want it to just end once all your events are done, you can have nothing else pop up in the credits and you'd have it end and you're good to go. Otherwise, you can reset your event number. I just set it back to 0 and it'll start going through the process again. This will only work if you are using tick or if you call this event on its own again from somewhere else. Remember, it won't work if we're just doing it from the construct, because once the last animation has finished, it's going to go into this default case, and then it will not do any of these. Because I've set it to 0, and then it ends the switch statement, and now this logic isn't hit again, and this animation finished isn't called. I could actually bring this up to where we had event construct going into that same branch. And this will allow us to reset the value once we've hit the default case, but then we'll still go into the same logic that we should have gone into otherwise. So we will wait for everything to come through here. I'm slowing down my credits. Once the mutant disappears, you'll see that the mannequin will pop back up, fade back in. And there you go. So that's only if you want it to keep looping. Actually, I think I like it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just going to see the best way I can to make this work. I'm actually going to bring it around to this reroute node that the event construct was on, because why not? How ugly could it be? The answer is pretty ugly. That's how you can make it work under any circumstances. If you're doing this for tick or on tick or time-based, you don't have to do this extra step of reconnecting it. This is only if you're doing it off construct like I'm doing it. And there you go, guys. So now you have credits where you can actually control what you're seeing, and it can be a little bit more automated, right? I'm not really controlling when these pop up. They're popping up based off the animations. But as a user, I can speed up the credits, and if I speed them up, then maybe I don't even get to see the mannequin, or the mannequin just starts loading in at the end. Or maybe I really want to take my time and enjoy the credits, and so I can slow down the credits. And then these images, this little slideshow can go on, and everything can be occurring while I'm reading the credits, and I have plenty of time left over to spare. So, I hope you enjoyed these updates to the credits. For me, they're super fun. I love credits. I always watch them all. Give support to the devs for whatever I just played. And if it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters again. Thank you guys for all the love and support. I'm really grateful and really, really happy you guys are here along for the ride. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you and assist you with anything that you need help with. Otherwise, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.